in the reality, you're going to want some cash because most people don't realize how demanding the cash flow can be for a business.
This has created value for me just already. I'm getting value from this conversation. I've already worked out a copywriting problem like within 5 minutes. I want to know what other value you got. I'm going to have to dig into this brain a little bit more. Can you give people a little bit of like a background about, before we dig into what you're doing right now, can you talk a little bit about where you come from, what you've been doing before you got to where you are right now?
Yeah, so I guess I've been living in Bali for about 3 years now, originally from Canada. Just grew up in a small city near Vancouver there. And I kind of always had the dream of the typical 4-hour work week. You know, read Tim Ferris's book back in, the 2000s, and that just kind of opened my mind like, whoa, so I don't have to show up at a workplace and then clock out at 4 or 5 p.m. and then come back the next day. Like, that whole location independence thing was always kind of my dream. So I got into that in kind of a roundabout way. I was, at the time, for years before I ever started my first online business, I was a downhill skateboard racer. And I was competing and just traveling around the world doing that to, Asia, the Philippines, and all over the States and Europe and places like that. And that was super fun, but as I was getting towards like 25 or so, I just didn't like the lifestyle as like my future, right? Like, I looked at some of the older guys in their 30s and I'm like, these guys still, have no money to speak of. They're always like trying to pinch their pennies on like, do I have enough money for beer after the race and stuff like this. Like, I don't want to be like that when I'm 30, So like, just started learning about the online business stuff through like Pat Flynn's passive income podcast and just all the different business models. And I never really went for anything until I had a near-death experience when I was racing longboards in the Philippines. So I was going down this road at about 70 kilometers an hour. It's supposed to be a closed road, but in the Philippines, they just don't have as good of safety measures. So there was a motorcycle coming up the track, oncoming direction, going maybe 50 kilometers an hour. And right when I was trying to go around it, it just swerved in front of me and cut me off to try to get out of the way because there's 4 other riders right behind me. So he kind of had nowhere to go. And I had to jump off my board, and I missed this thing by maybe 2 inches. And the beauty of this moment, too, is I have it on video, actually, from 2 different angles of GoPros. So I can see exactly this very pivotal moment in my life. And it just scared me. Like, up until that point, I had been kind of, hardcore mentality, like, whatever, I'm fucking extreme. Like, but that was a really inflection point for me because I realized like I almost just died on this remote island in the Philippines that doesn't actually have a real hospital, and
I still didn't have enough money for bear.
Yeah. Right, like in that case, like I had travel insurance, but if they weren't covering me, I didn't have any money to pay for my own medical bills, you know what I mean? So it just forced me to really take a hard look at my life direction and be like, do I really want to keep living in a van and traveling around doing this longboarding thing, or do I want to pursue some kind of online business? That was in the back of my mind, right? So that was the turning point where I decided that I was just going to do it. And I just literally, as soon as I got back from that trip, I got a course about how to sell on Amazon and just started going through that and just learned all the ins and outs, launched my first product maybe 5 months later, and was still working part-time as a carpenter, but slowly I was reducing my hours as a carpenter until the point where, maybe 3-4 months after that, I just decided to go full-time and just go for it.
I love that, first and foremost. Let's talk a little bit about Amazon FBA for anyone that doesn't really get it. I'm assuming it's Amazon FBA that you're talking about, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, can you give a little bit of a breakdown of what that is, what that looked like, what is the process?
Yeah, so Amazon FBA, so, I mean, obviously everyone knows that Amazon is this massive e-commerce marketplace, right? And it's just ridiculously big. Like something like 50% of all e-commerce is on Amazon. And it's kind of its own ecosystem within itself in that it's just way easier. Like Amazon takes care of so much of the process of selling your product online and then sending it to the customer that it's by far the easiest place to actually start an e-commerce business. And now that comes with challenges too, but the basic model is you can, most people who are doing it are going to find a manufacturer for a product in China. They're going to modify it in some way, put their own branding on it, and then they're going to get, 200-300 units or something for the first run sent over to the Amazon warehouses. Then once you have your product in Amazon warehouses, it's ready. Like you don't have to touch it anymore. Customer finds it on Amazon, they purchase it, Amazon's warehouse is going to send it to the customer, If the customer returns or something, that goes back to Amazon's warehouse too. You don't have to deal with any of that. And then you just collect the money at the end of the day. So it just makes things so much simpler. And the big reason, the real big value for sellers on Amazon is just their customer base. Like, they have people on a annual subscription for Amazon Prime that, one, they trust Amazon, their credit card's on file, and two, they know their product is going to show up there guaranteed within 2 days for Prime shipping, sometimes within 2 hours for some products if it's in the same city as you. And that is just like crack to online shoppers, right? It's instant gratification without leaving your couch on your mobile app, right?
So you're making the world a better or a worse place? This, based on the conversation we're having 2 minutes ago about the dangers of modern society, making it too easy.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly downsides to consumerism and everything at the extremes, right? But I think it's a tool like anything else, right? Like, social media is a great example. Social media is a tool that, when used properly, can be a great generator of wealth and business and can actually enhance your life, right? But it's also got a dark side. There's people who become very, mentally unstable from overusing it or using it in the wrong ways too. And e-commerce is exactly the same thing, right? If you use it properly, it brings great value to your life. You're not driving around town and waiting in checkout lines and stuff like that. So that's technically time saved, right? But, just don't get a shopping addiction and spend way more money than you would have normally.
Sure.
Of course.
I like the little disclaimer. I like it. How do you feel? So Amazon FBA versus dropshipping. So I was involved in dropshipping. I did conventional Shopify dropshipping. Now something we teach at Platinum is actually Amazon to eBay dropshipping, which is an interesting model as well. How would you say it compares in terms of the pros and cons?
Yeah, so they're very different models. So dropshipping doesn't really work on Amazon. Like, you technically can do it, but Amazon's customers, they have high expectations, right? They need their product there to their door within 2 days, or else they're really upset. They're going to leave you bad reviews and it's not going to work. So to do that, you need a lot more upfront capital. There's a lot more risk in selling on Amazon, because typically you're going to need to pay for a month's worth of inventory from your manufacturer in China, and then it takes some time for them to manufacture it and then get it sent over, right? So probably at least 2 months you're going to have to pay for something before you're actually going to see that money in the bank. And often, this can be, thousands, sometimes tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of inventory you're talking about here, right? Whereas in drop shipping, it's a lot less risk, because you don't have to pay that giant upfront payment of like, okay, let's get 1,000 units of inventory. You can just have it sent from your manufacturer or your shipper and then pay for it at that time, right? So there's pluses and minuses. Amazon, the biggest plus, if I were to have to say the biggest one, would be just the sheer volume of sales that you can grow in such a short amount of time. Like, when something works on Amazon, it can work like freaking gangbusters. Like, there's a lot of our clients that are doing more than $100,000 a month worth of sales for one product that's like super obscure. And it just, once it starts working, then it can start really working, right? And it's not like they're having to run all these crazy Facebook ads campaigns and always be, adding new creatives and all this kind of stuff. Once it's working on Amazon, it's kind of like Google SEO, where it's like, you're ranked, you're more likely to actually continue ranking and continue getting those sales. So it kind of stacks more easily, if that makes sense. Whereas in drop shippers, they're constantly, Facebook ads and those kind of things are just their bread and butter. The minute they stop the ads, probably the minute is also the minute that their sales are going to stop.
Yeah, so you kind of get a compounding effect, because those sales are telling the algorithm that you're in demand, therefore it's pumping it to the top of the queue, more people are seeing, and then you just get this continuous cycle and more sales, obviously.
Exactly.
And there's also the beautiful thing, this is like the thing that I hate with dropshippers. They always talk about, I did 10K a day, I did 20K a day. And it's like, yeah, but what profit did you make? That's the big thing for dropshippers. It's like the go-to thing that used to do my head in, because they'll be saying they're making 10K a day, but they're probably spending 11K a day on ads. Yeah. That's often the case. So when I look at the Amazon model, I see that as a lot more transparent. Like, with what you're doing, it must be so much easier to calculate your margins and actually create a profitable business out of that.
Well, it is and it isn't. So it's the great thing about Amazon is also one of its downsides. So if you can get it to work, kind of like Google SEO, you get to page one, you're more likely to stay there, and you're more likely to get the vast majority of the traffic. Like, I forget the stats on Google. It's like public stats, like the top 1 and 2 results or something, like 80% of the clicks go to the top 1 and 2 results or something like that. So it's similar in Amazon. So if you can get it there, great. It stacks, launch another product, get it there again. That's great. But when it doesn't work, you're going to be getting, not 10% of the sales, but you're probably going to get 1% of the sales. Or in an extreme case where you just really miscalculated something, then it's just not going to be working at all. And now you're stuck with the inventory that you're not selling, and you just have tens of thousands of dollars just sitting there not making a return, right? So it's kind of the downside as well. Obviously the same thing could happen in drop shipping, but it's just lower risk because you're not upfronting that capital for the inventory in drop shipping.
Sure. So what does the process look like? So as somebody that's built multiple successful Amazon businesses and you now help other people create their successful Amazon businesses, what is the starting point there?
The starting point really is, it's got to be cash. It's got to be money. So I've seen a lot of people, I've been doing this since 2016, and I've seen so many people fall into the trap of thinking they can make a very cash flow intensive business like Amazon e-commerce work with a very small budget. And yes, of course, it's possible. There's lots of exceptions to that, but in the reality, you're going to want some cash because most people don't realize how demanding the cash flow can be for a business like that. Like, I'll use the example of Tom Bilyeu. He built $1 billion protein bar company called Quest, and they were doubling every month for, every single month they're doubling. So they sell 2 million one month, they sell 4 million the next month, 8 million the next month. And so they had to front the capital for that amount of inventory before they're receiving the money, right? And that's amazing. They're having crazy growth, super, super fast, but it almost bankrupted the company because they just need to take on more and more debt to actually service that growth, right? And that can be risky too, right? If it all of a sudden something just stops working, like your Amazon account got suspended or something like that, then you can go bankrupt very easily, right? Now that's an extreme case, but that just illustrates the point that you need the cash to be able to survive those cash flow cycles, right? Don't just get into it and say, I have $10,000, so I'm going to spend the whole $10,000 just immediately on the first product, because you need that cash buffer to actually grow if you are successful.
Okay, so let's make an assumption. So what would you say is a decent, for somebody that's listening that would love to get started, what's a decent amount of money that they would need in that first instance, and how should they allocate that to not get into that issue?
Yeah, I think $10,000 really should be, it's not the bare minimum, but it's the bare minimum that I think is smart to get going with, right? Spend maybe like $4,000 or $5,000 on inventory, and then have that second $5,000 there for your next round of inventory growth, things you didn't anticipate and things like that. But the more the better. The more cash you have, the better in the e-commerce game. You can grow faster. You can go after higher priced products and things like that are harder to compete with. So cash is the first thing. The second thing to getting started on Amazon really is just the product, right? You don't want to go and do the whole white labeling thing, like sell something that's super generic, exactly the same as all the competition. Of course you can, and there's people who are successful with that, and that's one way to do it. But especially in today, there's so many sellers and there's so many people doing it. There's thousands of people every month freshly going through how to sell on Amazon courses, right? And guess what they're all looking for? The easy stuff. So, that for some reason, this is a hard concept for people to understand. I know because a lot of the influencers say, they try to position it as an easy thing, go sell something that exists already, white label it. But actually coming from the mindset of like, how can I actually create a good product that provides unique value in the marketplace, something that I can actually sell for a premium, and I'm not going to be dragged down in the price war that inevitably happens when 35 people are selling something that looks exactly the same, because that's going only one direction, is down very quickly.
Yeah.
Right? So spend the time on product development to make something that actually brings some unique value to the market. Doesn't have to be fancy, right? It just has to be something that's improved, something that is unique.
I think that's a really key point, and I think that's applicable across all online business models. And it's this kind of discrepancy between what the marketers are telling you and what the reality is. And obviously we all understand marketing. You want to make it look all great. You want to rent a private jet and pretend it is yours and get yourself a fake Lamborghini and all the rest of it, and like put yourself on the Instagram ad so people sign up. We all understand the model, right? Don't like it personally. I feel like it's out of integrity, but I get why that works. But then what people actually forget is that when you're doing that, you're doing it for you. if you actually provide no value, it's never going to create a sustainable business, because ultimately you need to create a demand. People have to want what you're actually offering for it to be sustainable, right? So when you're looking at this particular model, so with e-commerce, I feel like it's hard because it's so easy to get caught in the trap of just selling shitty products. And then it can work for a little while, but then it's not sustainable. So how do you really nail that down? And what does the process look like for really finding that product that is valuable, that's adding value to people's lives? So you're actually doing something worthwhile that then becomes sustainable.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the best way, really, we live in a day and age where we have access to the most incredible information that we possibly could for product development. Like, people 20 years ago could not dream up what we have available to us to actually improve products, right? All you have to do is go, you don't even have to leave Amazon. You can go look at the top reviews. Well, I mean, you should be reading all of the reviews, right? If there's a product you've identified, like, I want to sell a similar product, but I want to improve it, you just go to the top sellers of that product and read every single review, read every single question and answer on those listings. Like, what are people having problems with? What don't they like about it? What do they really like about it, right? Try to get inside the mind, the psychology of those people, and then it'll become pretty clear after you read through 200, 300, 400 reviews. It'll be pretty clear what these other products are lacking that would be valuable to the customers, right? You never want to assume that something is valuable to the customers. That's a common mistake that I see people make all the time, is that they assume that differentiation and value are the same thing. They're not, right? There's lots of people who are like, well, I'm the only person selling an orange tennis ball, so therefore I'm going to get some market share. What if people don't like orange, right? That orange is not value. Difference is not value, right? It has to be something that actually that target market finds interesting, not something you think is interesting. But, you know, and there's a million other ways to find this data online, but honestly, like, the most valuable stuff, real customers who actually bought your competitors' products. I mean, the data cannot get better than that. You couldn't pay for data better than that, you know?
Yeah. That's exactly what you want, right? You want to know exactly what they think. They're the ones that are buying it. I think what you said there is really important for people. I think this is a mistake a lot of people make. They're like, well, I like the sound of that. It's like, are you actually the target market? Are you selling a dog toy, and do you have a dog? Are you the right person to be making that comment? I fell into that trap many times when I was doing drop shipping in the early days. I was like, oh, I really like that. It looks really cool. It looks really cool. But I am not the type of person that was buying that thing in the first instance, ever. You know? Yeah,
and it's so funny, like, people get into that so much in e-commerce. Like, it's hilarious to see some of the situations. Like, one of our clients, he sells glitter, you know, body glitter, like, for women. And he like talks like this. He's like this big muscly guy with tattoos on. And he's like telling me the story about how he got into glitter. It's like, you know what? Just like glitter started selling well. And then, you know, this business blew up and now I'm the glitter guy. You know, it's like, I don't know freaking anything about glitter, but you know, a couple years later, I am the glitter expert. Like, I know everything there is to know about glitter.
What's some of the weirdest shit you've sold?
Oh yeah. There's well, the weirdest thing I've sold personally probably was these under bed restraints. So they're like, you know, like kinky stuff for the bedroom where you stick these straps underneath the mattress and then they come out all four corners of the bed to put on like the ankles and the wrist straps.
I've used them. I totally know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, but the one weird one from a client actually was, this was back in the early days of the company. I was doing a sales call in a co-working space. And a public area of the co-working space where there's people walking behind, and the client's product was penis enlargement pumps. So I got this thing open on my screen on Amazon, and I just had the thought in the back of my head, it's like, oh my goodness, like, people think I'm shopping for this penis enlargement pump right now. Like,
you start there going, my dick's massive, honestly, my dick's massive. So you had to kind of pretend that you weren't a pervert.
Yeah, it's a very awkward feeling with that open on your screen in a public place, I can tell you that. But I mean, that just goes to show there's a market for just about anything on Amazon, right? Like, even the smallest, weirdest niche things that you never heard of. We have clients who are doing more than $100,000 a month of like these weird products that you're like, wow, okay, that's a product even. But like, people build $1 million businesses out of weird, obscure stuff, you know, 8-figure businesses.
That's absolutely mad. And I think we were talking about this earlier, like the things that are available nowadays, the different opportunities that just weren't available 10 years ago. We live in a completely different world. What do you think are some of the new things that are coming up that are really changing the way people make money, the way people live right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two really big ones right now are the NFTs and blockchain in general, and then artificial intelligence, right? I mean, currently, people throw around the term AI really loosely, right? Like they're like, oh, this software has AI and stuff like that. And a lot of it's like laughable. It's just like, yeah, you have an algorithm that is like roughly improves itself, but it doesn't really work, right? But that curve is shifting really fast. So like a tool we're starting to use in our agency now, it's called Jarvis, and it's an AI copywriter, and it's crazy what this thing can do. And like, I remember last year I was looking at, like robotic blog rewriters, and like these were softwares that were taking an existing blog post and then like rewriting it and respinning it, and even that was pretty garbage. Like even that, it's like wasn't acceptable. It needed someone to go in and fix everything with existing content. But Jarvis can write completely unique content from scratch when you tell it what to do, and it's very good at it. So I mean, the curve is rapidly going from, just cliched using AI in the name, but it's not really that valuable, to like, it's going to be taking people's jobs, right? Like in a matter of years from now, I think they're going to start dropping off like flies, right? Because you can't compete with something that is thousands of times faster than a human, right? Like even robotic automation, like actual robots in manufacturing and stuff, they're maybe, dozens of times or at most hundreds of times faster than a human, right? But like, a lot of AI things we're talking about here, it's going to be thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of times better and more efficient than humans, right? So, and that's happening very, very quickly.
And I think that raises an interesting question, because so many people that look at like what we're doing and online business and stuff, it's like, oh, that seems too risky, especially for people that are looking to leave their safe jobs, and they're thinking entrepreneurship seems too risky. And then you look at something like this, it's almost like, if you look at it from a monetary perspective, it's like you're leaving it in the bank, you're going to lose to inflation over time. If you stay in this set job that's going to be that you'll end up going to get replaced, you're losing your safety to the future, essentially. And I think it's a real kind of interesting perspective shift that people need to understand, that it's not safe just to keep doing the same thing and not evolving and not developing yourself and not paying attention to these new things that are emerging in the world. So what do you think, what advice would you give to people right now that are potentially sat there, they're in their safe job and they may not be aware of these new emerging technologies that could jeopardize that safety, if you call it that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this requires really close examination. Like, I think it's really important to look at where the trends in technology are going and then try to create a narrative around what that means, right? So like that's the narrative that I just created with the copywriting AI. Like, I think in the next 24 months, copywriting as a job, as a profession, the value is going to plummet. It's going to go down to like 20% of what it was. The same that happened to graphic designers when all of a sudden people overseas are offering it for a much, much lower price. Good luck being a $60 an hour graphic designer today, right? There's only a very select few graphic designers that can even charge that.
Sure.
But like, I think it's very important to look at your own profession and see where it's going, because everything's being reinvented in 2, 3, and certainly 5-year time frames these days, and it's only accelerating even faster the further that we go. So now more than ever, so important to just try to create a narrative like, okay, so this technology is coming out. If this technology keeps getting better, then what is that going to happen? What does that mean? Well, it might mean that, this job's going to not be there in 5 years. Okay, when do I think that's going to happen, right? Like, don't let it catch you by surprise, because it moves so fast that I think a super important skill for our generation when it comes to career and entrepreneurship is just adaptation. So like, I just finished a amazing program with Tom Bilyeu, the founder of that $1 billion protein bar company that I was talking about business decision-making rubrics. And probably the most valuable course I've ever taken, to be honest, certainly in the past year or two here, because it specifically teaches decision-making frameworks for solving novel problems. So problems that have never been solved before. And those are the types of problems that we're going to be coming up against more and more and more as things like artificial intelligence and NFTs and blockchain and stuff like that completely change the way things are done, right? There's, if you thought the internet was a big disruption to business, which is, we all know how that turned out, is massive, then like there's going to be equal disruptions with artificial intelligence and NFTs and blockchain, if not greater, right? So being on top of the ball and just having the foresight to know that your career is not going to be the same 5 years from now, certainly not 10 years from now, and just adopting the mindset of how can I adapt and follow these trends instead of just be left in the dust and be one of the losers.
I think what you're saying about adaptation there is hugely, hugely important for people to understand, because I was watching something recently and they were looking at the adoption curve of mobile phones and then the internet and now blockchain. I think blockchain's been adopted, but it's gone up like 213% in terms of adopters per year. And that is just continuously increasing, because mobile phones, we only had a certain network effect around mobile phones, and then you had the internet. Now everybody's interconnected, and now people are adopting blockchain, which is already on the internet. Therefore it can be adopted exponentially faster than any of the previous technologies that were adopted really quickly. So as human beings, we have even less time to adapt. We don't have a decade or 20 years where we can sit there and go, oh, I think things are going to change now. This internet thing's starting to come through a little bit, you know? It's going to just be like a tidal wave that forces you to change. And if you don't, you're going to get left behind. And I think blockchain is the perfect example of that. That technology is completely changing the way as human beings we organize ourselves, especially from a financial perspective. What do you think the implications of blockchain technology are going to be on our society right now?
Yeah, well, it's going to be massive. Like, I think it's probably going to be the biggest transfer of wealth out of the biggest companies in the world, right? And I think it's inevitable. There's a lot of forces that are trying to stop blockchain from happening, because a lot of the wealthiest people and wealthiest companies in the world rely on blockchain not happening, right? It's going to pull the lunch out from their freaking lunch boxes. And I don't think there's anything they can do to stop it, because it's just such a perfect system. It's like the equivalent of Mother Nature, but in a financial system, right? It's got all the right checks and balances, and its fairness is built into the system. The honesty is built into the system. Like all these things, like all the reasons people don't like big financial institutions, there's no way that they're going to survive through this, right? So, I mean, the implications of that, I think, are very interesting. Like, we live in a very global society already, where, you know, people in India are employed by companies in America and all this kind of stuff. And consumerism, we all have access to very similar things in most places in the world, but that's going to reach another level when things like financial and banking services are available to every single person. There's no gatekeepers for any of that. There's no middlemen in all these different transactions, and like just everything is more accessible to everybody. Now we're really talking about a leveled playing field, right? Like how I was talking about that copywriting AI, and that's going to bridge the gap between the less skilled copywriters who maybe live in another country and the really good copywriters, right? Blockchain bridges that gap from the people who are working the lowest paid jobs or no job to now being able to more easily build wealth for themselves and participate in the economy and everything like that, right? So like, I mean, there's really no other conclusion than it's just going to make the world just a truly global place. You know what I mean?
I'm excited to see what that looks like, personally. I'm not a big fan of governments. I'm going to put it straight. I do not fucking think they have our best interests at heart. I feel like a lot of people have good intentions, but I feel like those good intentions are completely destroyed by the system as time goes on. And I think all of a sudden, when you don't need an intermediary in the forms of banks, in forms of governments, then the world becomes a very interesting place. The only thing that makes it a little bit concerning is people that have power don't like to give up power. So what does that look like? I like the long-term vision of it, because like you say, I don't think you can stop it. It's out the bag now. It's off. Blockchain's happening, right? What happens in the interim when those that don't want to give that up are put into a position when they realize they might have to? That's what interests me.
Yeah, and that's the thing that scares me right now too, with everything that's going on in the world. Like, it appears that Australia is basically trying to install an authoritarian government, right? Like they have taken away, they essentially can modify tweets and Facebook posts of anyone without a warrant. The government has the full power to do that, right? That's not too many more steps away from like a full authoritarian government, right? There's what, one or two more things they got to do, and then the job is done, right? So, like you said, it's an interesting time. I think there's definitely opposing forces. There's definitely people who don't want blockchain to happen, and there's blockchain itself is almost a self-perpetuating thing that just will make itself happen. So it's going to be an interesting time to see how it pans out.
Yeah, it's interesting enough that the complete lack of freedom of speech there is on social media, with depending on what side of the fence you're on. I mean, you could talk about masks, no masks, vaccines, no vaccines, all these different points of view. That's interesting. Now, when you chuck into the mix that you can actually modify what the other person's saying, the level of inauthenticity, the level of deception just becomes, it's like similar to not telling a lie. I'm not telling a lie, I'm just not telling the truth. But now it's like, no, you're actually just openly lying now. Like,
yeah. Well, and it's such a crazy time too. Like, there's never been anything remotely like this. Like, you look into some of the past examples of, like, fascism and, Hitler and his propaganda and everything like that. Like, sure, he's putting out propaganda and he controls all of the media and what everyone hears in the media. But people, I'm sure a lot of these people still had their own opinions, and they called BS, but obviously they're not going to speak up, right? Hitler had a very crazy regime going on. The big difference with what's happening today and why it's scarier today is that through censorship, it appears that everyone has the same viewpoint towards something, right? If they just censor out everyone who has an opposing viewpoint, then it just appears that, hey, maybe I'm the only one, maybe I'm the weird one who doubts all this stuff, and everyone else seems like they're convinced of it. And there's so much censorship going on right now in media and social media and everything like that, that there really isn't a two-sided argument going on. It's really being heavily suppressed. And that's the scary thing, is that it's propaganda without appearing as propaganda, right?
And that's the problem with it, because progressively over time it works. Statistically, it will have a serious impact, because even if you zoom out and you look at it over a long enough time frame, the longer it goes on that an opposing point of view isn't presented, the less and less people will be exposed to it over time. And eventually you get to a point where that point of view isn't even pushed out at all anymore. And then you've got a really, really distorted reality that's being created off the back of it, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. And like, that's why I think it's really important to be looking at what's happening in Australia, because they're kind of like the pilot study of how do you completely control what people say, like on social media. They have full control over that. They're not allowed to protest. Like, I mean, it's a scary thing, right? Because if freedom of speech is dead, then, it becomes so much easier for a government to do whatever else they want. Is that going to be good? I don't know. But it gives them the power to do what they want.
I think the point is that decision shouldn't reside with the government ultimately, and there needs to be some sort of neutral party that has some sort of say against it. And when that doesn't exist, then what the fuck happens? There is no say. Exactly.
And I mean, it's not a stretch. Like, I mean, there's, people so easily dismiss conspiracy theories about, authoritarian government. Yeah, right. But like, I mean, it just takes a little bit of poking around to go look at times that has happened in the past in history, like many, many times, and just look at the patterns, right? Like, look at the parallels between today and the censorship and all this stuff and what happened in all those other times. It's like, check, 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 check. Like, it would be incredibly ignorant to ignore that fact and just assume that the government has our best interests at heart.
Yeah, I think it's insane, and it's one of those things that happens so progressively over time that people notice it less and less. There's if you slowly take away people's freedoms, they notice less. And if you were to look at the disparity between where you started and where you're at now, in many instances you'd look at it and go, that's absolutely insane. But because it happens so progressively over time, it just kind of slowly comes in and becomes the new normal, if you would like, I think it's absolutely crazy what's going on right now. And for me personally, I went through like the whole conspiracy thing when I was younger, when I was like 20, 21, smoking weed, going, what are all these different documentaries? I got really into it. Then I realized that it took up too much of my time, and then decided to get on with my life, right? But now I'm kind of picking these things back up and looking at all these different concepts. And the tinfoil hat is looking like more and more like the sensible approach to take with what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah, man. Well, what's really funny about that is that NASA now actually officially admits that they have been tracking UFOs for decades, and they have hundreds of recorded UFO sightings, right? And like what, not alien sightings, right? But unidentified flying objects. They just call it something different. They have different terminology for it that's a little bit less woo-woo.
Didn't they change that recently? I heard they changed the UFO terminology recently to make it look slightly different.
Right. And they changed it so that they don't come off as total quacks. But the point is that they've been lying about that for decades, that saying it's like, we don't have any UFO sightings, blah, blah, blah. Like, of course not. But now it's all come out that it's been there the whole time, right? And they've been fully aware of this for decades and decades, right? So it's just another example of, the government saying one thing, but the reality is another thing.
It happens time and time again. I think a good example is like the war in Iraq. They're like, they've got weapons of mass destruction, and they got to the end of it, like, oh yeah, sorry, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction, but we'll just forget about that. The war made sense. It made sense, And,
totally.
And it just happens, like you said, time and time again. And it's weird because they just kind of get forgotten about. They just get brushed under the carpet, and it's like, yeah, we lied about that, sorry. But yeah, anyway, moving on. Next new exciting thing to come on. So then what happens with what's going on right now? It wouldn't surprise me. I'm not saying Corona's a scam. Like, I've had it myself. I know it sucked, right? It wasn't pleasant. But just with the way the government behaves, just in that perspective, I would not be surprised if they went, oh yeah, sorry, we just made that shit up, sorry. No.
Yeah, man. And just no accountability whatsoever. And the scary thing too is that it's so easy to create a narrative around some extreme thing. You can just get away with doing extreme things by creating conspiracy theories around it, right? So if I was someone really smart in the government and I wanted to push through some really crazy agenda that's like pretty extreme, right? Like installing an authoritarian government, for instance, it would be actually a good strategy to disseminate conspiracy theories about authoritarian governments, because then it's easier to dismiss anyone who has anything bad to say about it as a conspiracy theorist, right? And no one wants to be seen as a conspiracy theorist to their friends and their family, right? The friends and family are going to just start ridiculing them and calling them conspiracy theorists because they have seen the conspiracy theories, and it's crazy, right? So the more crazy they make their conspiracy theories, the easier it is to dismiss the opposition if they did want to install something crazy, right? So that's just an important thing to remember.
Yeah, I think because once you paint someone with a certain brush, it's like the whole like left versus right thing. When someone goes, oh, that person's a racist. As soon as you're tagged as a racist, your opinion is no longer valid. You no longer have a voice. You kind of deplatform somebody in that capacity, don't you, by putting them in that little box. And it's the same thing with the conspiracy theorists. Like, no, that's just a crazy conspiracy theorist. Don't listen to him. He says crazy stuff. And it's like, your opinion's no longer valid. Go over there, Totally.
You can just dismiss the entire argument with one statement.
And then you don't even actually have to address the points, which is the ludicrous thing. You're kind of refusing to go into a constructive debate about the different points and the different points of view because you're like, you're not worth listening to. Be gone. It's absolutely nuts. Where do you stand on like the whole vaccine situation? I think this is a good example because I watched a news thing the other day, and it was they were framing people who didn't want vaccines in a certain way. All the people they interviewed, they're like, why don't you want the vaccine? And they were hillbillies. Basically, they were people that didn't really know, that they were shown to be looking stupid, right? Everybody in the video looked like absolute morons. Let's forget that there's really well-educated doctors that don't want it. There's really intellectual people as well, but they only focused on the people that sounded stupid on camera, right? And that frames it a certain way. That puts them into the category of the people that don't want vaccines are idiots, right? What's your personal opinion on what's going on with that?
Yeah, so I don't have any problem with people who want to take a vaccine. I think it can be very beneficial, and it's very good with a lot of things. Where for me it gets really muddy is just the way that it's being handled, right? Like there's vaccine mandates in a lot of places, and the main narrative is just not honest, right? It's like the same thing as like, you remember the campaigns about drugs when we're like, teenagers and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I think they didn't work properly because kids knew that they were bullshit, right? Like, yes, drugs are bad, but these drug ads on TV were making it seem like you take this one drug one time and your life is destroyed. You're gonna just like, your teeth are gonna fall out and everything's bad. Right? And it's just not true, right? It would probably be much more effective if they were open and honest. Like, yeah, it's, it can create some bad things. It's not going to make your teeth fall out and make you have a heart attack instantly the first time you try it, but it's, it can have some bad consequences, right? It's honest, people actually trust it, right? But I remember myself as a young man, once I realized that it was BS, now the credibility for, the government just went down a notch, right? And I think the same thing is happening with the vaccines, right? They're just not being open and honest about the fact that, hey, of course there's downside risks to it. The people who, have heart issues and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, there's certainly been a lot of negative cases, but there's a lot of benefit too, right? If they're open and honest about it, then I don't think there'd be so many problems. But because they're just so heavily suppressing any kind of narrative that goes against vaccines are safe and this is the best thing to do and everything like that, now it gets really gray, right? Because that same mentality applied to other things, if that becomes acceptable, then it's game over for the free world.
Yeah, and it puts you, for me personally, as soon as, with most people, someone starts pushing against me, I want to push back. And as soon as someone's telling me I can't say this, I can't do this, I'm like, I kind of want it now. I'm a bit rebellious with my very nature. And then it further creates this weird divide, and it further creates this distrust. Because I'm sure there are, like I said before, I'm sure there are people in government that have great intentions and they generally want to do a good thing. But now I have more and more of a intrinsic distrust of what government's put on the table. Everything that's presented to me via media, I just think it's bollocks. I'm not interested in it, Everything that kind of gets presented with the government, I'm instantly suspicious of what's being said to me. So it's like I'm being further and further alienated from being brought in any kind of way that I would actually contribute,
Yeah, it's it's so hard to trust a government that is just constantly they're very obviously pushing one-sided narrative and making it seem like a one-sided narrative, right? I mean, some people make the argument that the censorship and everything like that is for the benefit because the vaccine is good and we have to censor it and going forward, but that's not how human psychology works, right? We understand when we're being lied to. Lots of people have seen the lies, even some of the lies make it into the mainstream media, but a lot of them don't. And it's just created this weird thing where it's okay, so do we just trust them that they're being inauthentic and not honest to us for our greater good? Or what is the intention behind the lying here? It just raises a lot of questions and really just destroys the trust of people, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and that's where I'm at, and this is why my highest value is freedom, and I believe that everybody should have self-sovereignty. And so that's why I care about online business, because I believe it's the first stepping stone, because as soon as you can work online, you can live in any country. So for example, if you work online right now and you're stuck in Australia, you would potentially have the option to escape that and still earn a decent living. So that's why I feel like it's so important. How do you create sovereignty for yourself? Because you're obviously in a similar position to me, where you have a big distrust of the government. You don't want anyone to have any control over what you do. How do you create that for yourself?
So yeah, I mean, the biggest one is you have to have a location independent income, right? If you're one of those people with a couple million in the bank and that's great, but most of the people listening probably aren't in that category. You probably need to create an income source for yourself, right? And that has to be location independent, because look at the world today, right? The people who lost their job because they couldn't go into their job is immense, right? And they're just in the wind with that, whatever today's policy is. I can go to work and I can make an income, or I can't, right? And government assistance is for some people for a while, but that can't last forever, right? So number one, the income source. Number two, one thing I'm really thinking about is just the intentions of different governments, right? So I'm seeing certain governments around the world, like Australia, for example, or France, lean much more heavily on the side of authoritarianism and, just much less value to freedom, where I see a lot of other countries valuing freedom a lot more. And so I think going forward, that's very important to think of as well, because in Australia, you're not actually allowed to leave Australia. That's the crazy thing. If you're an Australian and you're in Australia, you cannot leave. You're stuck, right? You're not even allowed to leave, I think, within something like 5 kilometers of your house. And so that's that's a scary, real threat in today's world, right? If your government is very much leaning towards they are going to implement authoritarian policies, you might just end up in a situation where now all of a sudden your freedom is pulled out. And guess what? You didn't escape fast enough, right? Australians who are there, they're stuck, right? They got to see it play out now.
And nobody wants to be in that position. And I don't want to leave my fate in the hands of somebody else, essentially. I mean, here in Bali, we're very lucky. We have a lot of freedom still. We can kind of essentially live the lives that we want to live, which is absolutely amazing. What advice would you give to people? So they obviously earn money, have that location independence. How can they stay connected in a way and kind of make sure they stay ahead of the curve?
Right. So, I mean, unfortunately, I think there's no way around. You just got to be well-informed and researched, right? Like, there's so much news and distraction going on and stuff like that. So I try to limit the amount of information that I intake. But, you know, the situation in the world today changes so quickly. I think it's very important to have at least a few good sources of information to like see the things that are happening, right? Because otherwise you could be in that situation where, you know, all of a sudden borders closed, you're stuck, authoritarian government installed, and your freedom goes goodbye.
You're
right?
essentially in a camp. You're basically in a prison camp, which is what Australia is being turned into right now. Yeah,
like basically turned back into its roots of a prison camp, unfortunately. I know that joke's been going around a lot, but it's a sad but true situation. So, yeah. And then another thing too is just understanding like flag theory is a really good resource for this. It's the theory that you can have the most possible freedom if you install certain things in different countries in the world. So part of flag theory is having multiple passports, right? So like if you only have one passport, then that government has control over whether you can travel, right? They can seize people's passports instantly. Like they decide you're doing something they don't like, passport's gone, guess what? You're stuck wherever you are. So having multiple passports is a really big one. You know, having companies set up in multiple countries, different things like that, right? So just understanding, like, if a crazy situation happened, what would be my options? And if you go through those options and it's like, okay, if I leave my home country, then I'm screwed, then you should probably do something to make sure that's not the case, right?
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the options that you're looking at in terms of like countries that have a little bit more freedom as their higher values right now?
Yeah, so just like knowing what countries those are, like Mexico is one that's like very open and liberal. And Indonesia has been fairly liberal. And like one reason I like Indonesia is that I'm not sure that the government is powerful enough to implement like a full authoritarian government. Like the government is so ineffective at everything, like just so much corruption and so much
Yeah.
like other stuff here that like I'm not sure that they would be successful.
Yeah.
So that gives me a little bit of comfort. Like I have a company set up here in Indonesia, and I'm actually in the process right now of removing my tax residency in Canada and then installing my tax residency here in Indonesia. You know, just because I prefer to live here. I've been here for 3 years, and I don't really like the direction that the Canadian government is moving. And I trust more in Indonesia and a growing economy of Bali than I do in the Canadian government. And that's, you know, so I just think it takes a lot of careful thoughts. Like, what do you value? Like for me, freedom, just like you, it's the number one value. So now that I know that, is where I'm living today and where I plan to live in the next years, is that conducive to having freedom, right? And just making sure that if that's the highest priority, then you have some backup plans or some steps that you've taken to ensure that is still intact.
I think that's a important point, and I think what you're doing right now, you're actually helping people create that, because let's go back to the first point, is create that location freedom. That's what you help people do. So let's talk a little bit about your business and how you help people do that. Tell people about your company that you run now, because obviously you did Amazon FBA before. Now it's a little bit more than that. Can you talk into that a little bit, so people that need that help, that need that first stepping stone, they know who to come to?
Yeah, and this is an interesting case too. So like, you know, Amazon itself, selling products, like I said, it's cash flow intensive. That's not going to be for everybody. If you're someone listening and you got $100 to your name, you can still start an agency, right? So that's the main business that I'm running right now, is an agency, services, providing services to other businesses. And the key point here is to other businesses, because businesses can afford to pay you more money than your average person can, right? So businesses is a great client. And we basically help brands sell more on Amazon. We provide them a bunch of very specialized Amazon services. So we're very focused on the Amazon niche itself. We're the Amazon experts. We're a team of about 25 full-time employees now. And we have an office here in Bali. We got team members in Vancouver and Singapore, and graphics teams all in the Philippines. And mostly remote too. Like we only have one actual physical space that we pay for. Everyone else works from their bedroom or their living room or something like that. And that's kind of the world, right? So the great thing about this company is that when you're scaling and you're growing the company, there's no reason you got to go drop in, max out your own credit card or go take a loan out from somebody or get an investor, because you can grow an agency, a service business, just purely organically. Literally, if you have $0 or negative $50,000 in your bank account, doesn't matter. You can start with just providing value, providing services to other businesses.
So let's talk a little bit into agency and how that starts. So I've actually had many people ask for my different services. I could probably set up an agency myself with an array of different things that I've done over the years. So what does that really look like?
Yeah, so an agency like mine just started purely organically. Like I was actually doing the service myself because I was an Amazon seller. I understood how to write the Amazon listings and make them optimized for the Amazon algorithm. And I was just doing that kind of on a contract basis for other sellers that were my friends basically. And then it just grew very organically, right? So once I was getting enough business, then I hired a virtual assistant in the Philippines for $500 a month. And they would help me with some things. And then I had to hire some writers. And then we expanded our services to offer product photography. Then we expanded to video. And then, right, it was a very organic process. And it's profitable the entire time, unlike a lot of other business models where there's a big upfront cost, or you're just trying to make something profitable for sometimes years before you're ever going to see any return. Anybody can go and start an agency and get it off the ground and start making considerable money pretty fast.
And what does the model look like? So let's just go from like client acquisition to like the end point where you've got clients that you've had for a while.
Yeah, so our client acquisition is mostly through SEO. SEO and like partnerships with influencers in the Amazon space. So they come through our sales funnel. Like I think one of the things that I'm personally best at is sales and marketing. So like we have, they fill out a quote request form, we get some information from them, and then they have to book a call with one of our sales reps, right? But it's positioned as a value call, and they do provide value on there. It's like an Amazon audit that they get some value on, but we just have an excellent sales team that has gone through some amazing sales training that actually, this is the key part, will actually get the person on the other end what's best for them, right? That's why the sales team is so good, is because people trust what they say. They're not trying all these manipulative sales tactics that they work, but they're going to work on the least intelligent people that you're just kind of preying on. The best sales tactics are actually providing the best thing for the customer on the other end, even if that's the cheapest thing that we offer, or even if that means that, hey, honestly, you're not the right fit for our services, maybe you'd be better off with this company, right? And then that is super key. So they go through that process. There's like an onboarding process that they work with us. They get going and everything like that, and they work with the team. And then we have like some ongoing monthly services too for some of our clients that go on through that. But honestly, my business model is a bit of a complicated beast. It's much easier to do something like, a lead gen agency or like an advertising agency than a creative agency that is like a bunch of different photography projects and things like that. Like it is much more complicated.
Obviously yours has evolved over time, hasn't it? It's gone from like what was obviously a basic agency offering one service. Now obviously been going quite a while, so there's a lot more pieces to that puzzle. What you said there about sales is really interesting to me as well, because I came from a sales background and I was selling shitty products. I did like cold calling, all sorts of different insurance. horrible type of sales, and I had a massive distaste in my mouth from it for a long time. And it's only recently again that I've actually enjoyed sales again, because I can now come from a place of integrity. I can actually do sales in a way where I know I'm just offering value, and I'm coming from a space where there's no scarcity there. I don't really care if I get the customer or not. I'm kind of unattached. If I can help you, brilliant. I want to add value to your life. But if I can't, then I'm really happy to tell you that's not the best option. And I feel like that's kind of a move, like a direction sales has gone. I don't know whether it's just me that's catching on late or whether this is the direction it's gone, but I feel like everything's moving away from these kind of used car salesman kind of like tactics where they're preying on scarcity and creating fake urgency, you know, all these different horrible tactics that salesmen use. And it's going now more to a place of just authenticity, of actually offering real value. Do you think that that's actually a shift that's taking place in sales at this point?
Oh, absolutely. It's because you can't get away with that stuff anymore. With social media and the internet, your reputation can be shot from a very small handful of bad interactions with people, right? So if you get a scammy reputation, that's going to be with you very quickly and probably permanently, right? You need a few like scam reviews and stuff like that written on the internet. When someone Googles you, well, you might as well just start over and scrap that business, right? Back like before the internet, it was common because it worked really well and companies weren't held accountable to it, right? So like I did like a vacuum sales, commission only sales job when I was like a teenager. And the techniques that we were learning were all about how do you basically manipulate the prospect into feeling stupid for coming up with objections. Like you got to make sure you say things so that, you know, logically they can't even say these concerns about the product, and like they would feel like an idiot if they don't agree and buy, right? Very manipulative. And if you do that in today's world, one, it's like, it's kind of old. Everything in marketing works for a certain amount of time and then everyone uses it and then it kind of stops working. But two, it's just like that reputation just gets through so much faster, right? Like it's, your Google reviews go down to 2 stars out of 10. Like that's the death note for a lot of businesses, right? So I think just out of the nature of the internet, more than anything, it pays to have authenticity and honesty, right? Especially in the long term. Maybe you can you can surely make a quick buck by doing that and using those tactics, but it's going to be at the expense of your long-term success.
I think that's an epic point to wrap up on. I love that. I think it's really, really valuable information. I think you've chucked out a whole load of value for everyone listening to this today. So I just want to thank you for coming on, man. And can you just tell everybody where they can find you, where you're at, and where they can connect with you?
Yeah, so if you want to check out the Amazon agency, that's kenjiroi.com, KENJIROI.com, or just reach out to me on Instagram. It's I am Danny Carlson on Instagram.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, man. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure.